Assalamu alaikum friends. Here we are again with you for another episode of the Think Tank Talk. What is it about? It's about policy issues. The policy issue today is Pakistan, which seems to be stuck in a cycle of loans and non-growth strategy, and that's why it keeps coming back to the International Monetary Fund. Right now it's going through the 22nd extended facility program, which again seems to be in doldrums, on the verge of near non-completion because of some basic issues. What are those basic issues? Are they structural? Can they be addressed? For this, we have today with us economist Javed Hassan Saab. He's the ex-chairman of the Economic Advisory Group, which is a economic policy think tank, and thank you very much, Javed Saab, for sparing.
Thank you very much, Imtiaz Saab, for inviting me.
Yeah, so we need to discuss some fundamentals, why Pakistan is here. What are the basic problems that afflict Pakistan's economy?
Imtiaz Saab, we have to look at it in terms of very fundamental issues. Pakistan is now under the 22nd IMF structural reform program, its bailout program. It most likely will have to go into the 23rd. Yet, in just about every measure, we seem to lag behind South Asia and way behind Southeast Asian countries. Our development in terms of both economic overall production as well as HDI, Human Development Index, falls way behind our comparator countries. Now, we have to ask a question. This is after 22 structural reform programs. We are still where we started at probably in 1958, not much better. So I think there is now an issue that we need to start looking at very deep. What is our civil military elite doing in this country, which has been responsible for where we are at presently? Essentially, it seems all the aid and lending, and now we are indebted country, has been used to maintain the status quo. While you have a burgeoning population, there has been little that has been done to bring about inclusive growth. Now, see, what is interesting is we keep talking about sustainable inclusive growth. This is what the international funding agencies, multilaterals, whether it's IMF, World Bank, ADB, EU, whoever looks at Pakistan, they always talk about sustainable and inclusivity. And I'm sure they are sincere about it. But unfortunately, in reality, Pakistan has seen anything but sustainability and inclusivity. Large sections of our society, 70% of our population is youth under 30. Much of the society has a per capita income of less than $2,000 per annum, barely sufficient above poverty line. Now, they have been excluded from whatever little growth that has been taking place. Now, this may seem all right. Life is unfair. Very often, there's an accumulation of wealth at the top, and that gradually percolates down. But no, this is not the case. In Pakistan, what has also happened is that there has not been any productivity improvement because we have not focused on investment in skills development, in education, in basic health, so that effectively the productivity and the capacity to develop large sections of your population is not there.
Why? What is the primary reason? Because we have seen military governments, we have seen civilian governments, there's a lot of talk, a lot of promise, but again we are into the 22nd IMF program. So why is it recurring? Who is obstructing the reforms?
See, the world over, it is accepted that the elite really drives the agenda, like it or not. And generally there is an elite consensus which is talked about, which tries to bring about some reform. And if it is an enlightened elite, it knows that its survival is dependent on greater sharing with the rest of the population. They might do well themselves. In Pakistan, it seems that the elite has very much, this is both civil and military, that it has very much decided or lives in the illusion that they can prosper without sharing any of the fruits with the rest of the population. And that really has now become very much part of our, what we call the status quo, where a certain group of people take all the benefits, they're effectively rentiers, they extract. The institutions have also become extractive. So they facilitate this extraction process. They ensure that power stays in a select group of people, select group of families, select group of institutions, and all the benefits that can accrue from the economic efforts are basically taken by this very small slither of society.
So you're talking of an extractive elite, something that this famous book, Why Nations Fail, also had highlighted several years ago.
I think in the book itself they mentioned Pakistan, and I think Echemoglu very much looks at Pakistan as an example of an extractive society where a small elite tries to basically garner all the gains. So yes, that is it. It's really extractive elite with extractive institution designed to extract as much as they can for themselves. Very often this gets repatriated overseas. There is within this, because of this military intervention from time to time, the democratic process which would normally lead to some degree of accountability within society would also lead to some degree of questioning of the elite by the masses. Given that there has been military intervention, that kind of democratic process which leads to accountability has not taken place.
But the world global institutions like the international finance institutions, including the IMF and the World Bank, continue to engage with the same extractive elite.
Well, that is a question mark. They are probably, in the past, one can say there has been a feeling that things will change, we need to continue. There's also been, Pakistan has been very much part of the global strategic alliances with various, whether it's against Soviet Union or war on terror, and that has often provided the excuse for the extractive elite to continue getting the rents, whether it's geostrategic rents or other forms of rents, to continue this process. I think it is coming, that process is coming to an end now. And I don't think that kind of extraction can continue, because now Pakistan finds itself in an indebtedness position where it can't service easily its debt. So even the international institutions, which have to a certain extent been passive, or I would not want to say joining in this process, but they have been possibly passively allowing this to happen, they probably need to think about it. I think there's
Before you move forward, I will come back to this. The primary issue these days, once again, the IMF is demanding to jack up the markup rates in times of crippling inflation for a low-income country like Pakistan. Is that a fair demand?
It's a very tough question, Imtiaz Sahib. It's one that I, as an economist, feel that monetary policy, which really looks at interest rates, is an important factor. One of the reasons why we have inflation, and we have inflation close to 38% in April 2023, and it seems food inflation is close to 50%. One of the reasons why we have inflation of this level is because of depreciation, rupee depreciation. Why we have depreciation? Because we maintain negative real rates. That is where the interest rates are much lower than the inflation level. The state bank has been very slow in responding earlier. If it had responded much earlier in terms of interest rates, when the interest rates were beginning to move up, and they made sure that we had positive rates, probably inflation wouldn't have had run away, and rupee would have also maintained its level. But now...
But how did the inflation run away in other countries? It is hitting all countries.
No, you're absolutely right. There are global commodity crisis, but if you look at neighboring countries like India, Bangladesh, you don't have the same level of inflation. Pakistan has had much more effect of these global shocks. But I think it's largely due to our own poor policy making. One of the disastrous policies was to have a peg currency, or attempt at peg currency, when Mr. Dar came in. If we have to remember, April last year inflation was high, it was 13%, but nowhere as high as today, which is close to 38-39%. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with our own poor policies, a lack of confidence. We have also created supply chain constraints. So a lot of these things, but the question is whether inflation, interest rates should be raised or not. I think at this juncture, raising interest rates will not necessarily bring down inflation.
Yeah, also this brings me to the question that in a country which produces its own vegetables, its own corn, a lot of food is produced inside the country. Why, despite that, the food prices are still high?
I genuinely think there's lots of question marks. It is largely due to a lack of confidence in the currency and an expectation that we may at some point default. There's also a fact that there's been supply constraints. I know the food we can have, and you have seen bumper crops in wheat, and we'll see that in other so that the transmission mechanism will take time. As we get more bumper crops, we hope to see some decline in food inflation. But there are other products where there is inflation, and if you see just housing material, the prices have dramatically gone because a lot of this is imported goods. Where there are constraints, where the government has put administrative controls on imports, people are importing through other channels using hundi and hawala to make payments. That is causing inflation. So a lot of this is largely due to our administrative measures. But I think we have to be very careful. I am not trying to dodge your question about interest rates. I think at this moment it might be not that helpful if interest rates are further raised. But at the same time, we can't look to lower rates at this juncture.
Yeah, but how does Pakistan, looking forward, extract itself out of this vicious cycle?
There needs to be a number of things done. I think one of the key issues in Pakistan, and I am not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, as an economist, but it has come to a realization that economics as it is less of an issue here. It's essentially rule of law. When we have basic constitutional issues not resolved in a country, when you have, as you know, a question mark of 90 days after a dissolution of assembly being questioned, that elections being held, not taking place, then effectively the constitution is being set aside. Now, I know as an economist that's not my purview, but having said that, once you start abandoning the rule of law, then very basic things. There's very little chance of greater investment in this country. It's also questionable if many of the multilateral agencies would be willing to work where there is question marks about the rule of law. There's also GSP Plus, where something like 6 billion of our exports are to Europe. GSP Plus now will go to the European Union Parliament. Now there'll be obviously question marks about rule of law and human rights. You have seen in the US Congress itself. So I think while economists try not to delve into these issues, it comes back to why nations fail. The structures of nations, extractive institutions, how rule of law plays, those broader issues need to be addressed. The elite here, whether civil or military, needs to now think about it. It cannot be as business as usual any longer. We have run the course of extraction. We probably, the elite needs to think about how can it make it such that there is some sharing of power as well as the fruits of the economy. And future cannot be based on how just one group of people benefit most.
Well, thank you very much for this exciting talk. And viewers, you see, it boils down to Pakistan's ruling elites, whether it's civil or military, that they shall have to give up the old bad habits, and they shall have to think of the benefits for the common people, for the dominant majority. Until they do this, Pakistan will remain caught up in this vicious cycle of loans, non-performing loans, no growth strategy, and the consequence will be disasters, will continue to be disasters for the common people, for the dominant majority. And as Javed Saab said, it cannot be business as usual anymore. Thank you very much.